Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Karen Fabian, and I'm so glad you're here. I know you've got limited time, so thanks for spending some of it with me. Whether you're a brand new yoga teacher, currently in training, or you've been teaching for years, this podcast is for you. My goal is to help you feel like teaching can be easy, fun, and a natural extension of who you are, rather than something you have to do the right way, whatever that is, or something that feels like you have to work hard at it all the time. This isn't a podcast where I'll be telling you what to do or critiquing your teaching. Instead, I'll share frameworks, skills, and techniques you can experiment with to see what works for you, especially when it comes to understanding anatomy, cueing, and sequencing. I'll share ideas that may challenge what you believe about what it takes to be a yoga teacher. All I ask is that you keep an open mind, because some of what I share may sound different from what you've heard. We'll also talk about the mindset of a confident teacher, not only because it's such a big part of empowered teaching, but because it's rarely discussed. With that, welcome, and let's get into today's conversation. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 401. If you listened to last week's show, you know, of course, because you can count backwards, it was episode 400, and that was a big milestone. And I just want to thank you once again for being part of this experience, being part of my podcasting community. I love that we have this time together every week. And yes, I have been recording every week since 2018. How crazy is that? So today I'm back again. I'm actually recording this a little earlier than usual. I usually record on Thursdays for the episodes that go live, always on a Monday. But today is only Tuesday. And the reason I'm recording on Tuesday is because Thursday I get to go teach 3 days of anatomy to teachers in my friend's training program out in Cleveland. I've known Tammy really since the beginning of my yoga training. When I took my first teacher training with Baron Baptiste back in 2002, she and I met. I don't know if we met at that one or the second one I took, which was the very next year. But needless to say, we met for both of us really at the start of our teaching paths. And even though she lives in Cleveland and I live in Boston, we would occasionally see each other when I was still teaching. I had started teaching for Baptiste Yoga when I graduated from teacher training, probably a little bit after that. And she had a Baptiste affiliate studio. And so we would inevitably end up at different trainings as we were both kind of moving through the path there as a teacher. And so I have just such a fond connection to her. And when she reached out to me at this point, probably 6 or 7 months ago, and said, "Hey, I know anatomy is your passion. I'd love for you to come do a section on anatomy to my 300-hour teachers. Will you do it?" I was like, absolutely. So I'm going to be on a plane to Cleveland this coming Thursday. And I can't wait to tell you how it all turns out when I record the episode for the following week. So for right now, I am 2 days before leaving and I'm super excited. I've done a lot of prep. I've done a lot of thinking, just really like, what do I want to share in this Friday night, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday experience so that it really is energizing to the teachers that are there. So I can't wait to share more about it with you when I come back. So for today, what I wanted to do is talk about something that's been coming up a lot. And if you are kind of an established teacher, someone who's, been teaching for a while, you probably on some level can relate to this when you were newer. And if you're a newer teacher or a teacher in training, this is probably going to be more directed at you. But anyone can obviously benefit from this conversation. And I hope even if you are someone who's been teaching for a while, you either can get something from thinking back or even thinking forward. Because once I tell you about the topic, it is something that you could even do as an established teacher. And it's in that category of what is called pivoting. So it has to do with the style of yoga you teach. So I want you to think about this kind of overall question: what style of yoga should I teach? Because that's been coming up a lot in conversations I've been having, mainly with people that are getting ready to start a teacher training program or are in a teacher training program. And so they have questions around, what style of yoga should I teach? Should I do vinyasa, power, hatha, ashtanga? Usually what I find is the Ashtanga teachers and the Iyengar teachers, they have a pretty deep connection to that lineage from who trained them. And so they don't always have questions as much as other people, but sometimes they do, because even though that's their background as a student and initially the training they went to, they're starting to question if that's really what they want to teach. So there's this conversation around pressure to pick a style. Like, what style of yoga do I say I teach when somebody asks me? But more importantly, and really more what comes up when I talk to teachers, is I feel this pressure to pick a style. So I want to give you a different way to think about this. And I also want to factor in the idea that I think for a lot of yoga teachers, and I certainly do not consider myself a yoga scholar, but there definitely are yoga teachers out there who do deep dives into the history and the philosophy of yoga. And they are definitely, I would consider them yoga scholars. And when you have background like that, you tend to be really clear on the different styles of yoga and the lineage. I mean, there are a handful of books out there that are pretty well known that go into this, going way back thousands of years and then moving forward to today times. But I want you to think for this conversation just in terms of the general categories of yoga. So even at the beginning of this conversation, when I talked about Baptiste, you could consider that to be one style. Baptiste falls under the umbrella of Hatha yoga. But then you have other styles: Iyengar, Vinyasa, Yin, power, heated power, restorative. Um, what was, oh, Kundalini. Um, I remember there also at one point there was a style that focused on spirals. I cannot remember the name. The founder was Todd Norian. Maybe I'll think of it as we're talking. But that was a style of yoga. I don't know if it still is, but certainly most likely probably is. So obviously there's more under that umbrella, but that just gives you an idea of the different styles that are out there. So where the confusion oftentimes comes from is when teachers pick a training to attend, oftentimes they pick it based, or sometimes they pick it based on the schedule, the cost, the location, the timing. And in today times, there are so many teacher trainings out there. And what I've found when I talk to people is they're not always picking a training to attend based on what they want. They're sometimes picking it based on any of those other variables or a whole bunch of those other variables. So what sometimes happens is that teachers are in a training program that doesn't even reflect yoga that they practice, or teachers who they know, or yoga that is a style that they want to practice. They're basically taking the training because some of the details of the training worked for them. Now, I will say something I've said a lot, which is no knowledge is lost. You're going to take that training, you're going to get training in yoga teaching. The challenge is going to be you're probably not going to get a lot of sequencing support or literal sequences that look like what you want to teach. So you can pretty quickly see how going to a 200-hour teacher training that doesn't really represent how you want to teach could definitely be confusing and could leave you feeling like this isn't really what I want to do. And like some teachers I've recently talked to could leave you feeling like you're questioning, can I even be a yoga teacher? Is this even possible for me? And so that's one of the other reasons I wanted to do this episode, because I wanted to catch you before you count yourself out. Because you do not have to count yourself out. I've never met anybody who I would say, hey, I think you should just give up on your interest in being a yoga teacher. It's not something I would ever say to anybody. And so don't count yourself out, even if you're feeling like you're taking a 200-hour training, or you took a 200-hour training, or you're teaching a style of yoga and it just doesn't feel like the right fit for you. Let's just go through this conversation and see how we come out on the other side. So what often happens, and this might speak to you if you're currently teaching and you sort of know in the back of your mind the training you attended, and again, I'm talking about your 200-hour training, just really wasn't an exact fit for you. I mean, I can remember, and I've talked about this before on the show, when I went to my first teacher training, it was before Facebook and Instagram. So I didn't see an ad. I didn't have any sort of marketing materials, except I went to the Baptiste studio as a student. I was going there for a year. There was a poster one day in the lobby about let's go to Maya Tulum, level 1 teacher training with Baron. And that's how I found out about it. And that's how I went. So obviously today it's very different for teachers. They, find a style, they find a training through a whole bunch of different ways, including teachers who've told me, I signed up for a training simply because it was 100% online and just 100% of watching videos. And that I thought would work for me. So again, if you're looking back from the point of view of your teaching now, you may have some concerns about, or you just, some of this may resonate with you, is I guess what I'm saying. And you may start to realize, boy, maybe that initial training I took sort of missed the mark. And some of the signs that that might be what's going on with you is that sequencing feels hard, that you're spending a lot of time creating sequences, that you're second guessing yourself, that you're trying to sort of fit into a style. I mean, think of it like you're wearing some outfit that totally doesn't represent something you would wear, but maybe you're wearing it just because you see other people wearing it, or it's a popular thing to wear, which is kind of the same thing. So I want you to think about what's going on with you right now, especially around sequencing, and does it potentially tie back to how you were trained? To me, there's nothing, I don't want to say sadder, but there is a sadness in me when I think about this. There's nothing that, I mean, let me reframe it. There's nothing that makes me want to help a yoga teacher more than someone who says to me, uh, I don't like the sequences I'm teaching. I don't feel a connection to them. Feels really hard for me. It doesn't feel like a reflection of what I even like about yoga. And remember, it may not be an all or nothing. It might be certain sections of the sequence, or, a lot of teachers in today times, they're teaching, and Baptiste is like this, to a structure that's given to them. They don't have really the freedom to teach how they want. They're more teaching to what the studio requires they teach to. And I've talked recently to some teachers that are in studios like this, and they always tell me they have the freedom to sort of break out of the defined way of teaching. So if that's your situation, and that jives with you, that's great. And believe me, if you've listened to the show before, I talk about the concept of a signature sequence, and I love that concept. I'm just bringing this up because if you're feeling like you're teaching in a studio where they're requiring you follow a set sequence, and on top of that, that set sequence doesn't feel authentic to you, doesn't feel like it gives you a chance to teach how you want to teach, then that is absolutely a sign that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. And I just want to bring up one more thing in regards to that. When I say that's a sign that something needs to be fixed, I don't mean that in a mean-spirited way or like a pejorative way, like that's a problem, you need to fix it. But I am speaking plainly to you because too many teachers that I talk to are just tolerating this experience that is less than for them out of some feeling like, oh, well, I can't get another yoga gig if I quit this gig I'm in now. Or this is a particular studio that has an aura about it, or it's a coveted teaching spot, and I don't want to give that up. Even though, in the same breath, they might tell me, I don't really like teaching there. I don't really like the style of yoga I'm teaching. So I just want you to realize that these things are problems. And for whatever reason, yoga teachers don't often think about things as problems that need to be fixed. They think about problems because plenty of yoga teachers have problems. I hear about them all the time. But so many yoga teachers think they can outthink the problem instead of just fixing it, or maybe they don't know how to fix it. So instead of asking for help, they'll simply say to themselves, I just need to work harder at it. Or they'll say to themselves, there's something wrong with me that I'm not getting it. And no, this is not the case. That's why, everything that I do with yoga teachers, I really talk about it in the context of getting support, getting help, being supported, coaching teachers, because when I use the word program, I feel like people just toss it into a bucket with everything else that's out there. But that's definitely not how I look at the work that I do with teachers. I look at it as supporting you to fix the problems you're having so that you don't have those problems anymore. Just a really clear approach to supporting a yoga teacher. And I don't think teachers oftentimes think that's possible. I think they oftentimes think, oh, I have to get 300 hours more or 500 hours more of training and this problem will go away. Or I need to work harder at it. Or maybe there's just something wrong with me and I just need to tolerate teaching, like we're talking about here, teaching in a studio where the sequence doesn't feel like a fit for me, but I just need to deal with that. And no, that is not the case. So when we kind of shift into the reframing thing, it's not really about style. I mean, yes, of course, when we look at the history of yoga, we can use the word style or method. I think style is probably more what is referred to when we say, oh, vinyasa style versus Iyengar style, right? So yes, it's not so much that, but I also want you to think that style is sometimes used from the marketing standpoint, from the standpoint of distinguishing your studio, like what style of yoga do you teach or what style of yoga does this studio offer? What I really want you to think about is what kind of yoga is the kind of yoga that I love, like that I love to practice. Because oftentimes the style of yoga that you love, the natural evolution of that is you are inspired to teach it. So a good reframe for this whole conversation is to ask yourself, why did I start practicing yoga? What style of yoga was attractive to me to practice? I mean, I honestly can't really imagine a scenario where someone would teach a style of yoga that they don't have any experience practicing. Teaching usually comes from your own experience as a student. Although, and I've made this distinction before, and I want to make it again, when you decide you want to teach yoga, you're now stepping into teaching it, which is different from being a student. So, many times people will say to me, I'm teaching, but I was practicing for 20 years. And honestly, the practicing for 20 years doesn't really help you too much when you're teaching because you're using different skills when you're teaching. than when you're practicing. But in this conversation, when we talk about sort of at a intuitive level or at a level of connection and even spirituality to a certain extent, but definitely physicality, what style of yoga do you love to practice? Because that is a really great place to start when you think about what style of yoga do you want to teach. I mean, I have definitely had some conversations recently where teachers will say to me, I'm teaching power vinyasa, but I really prefer to teach slow flow. Like that one in particular, I hear a lot. Or I'm teaching heated power and I really can't stand the heat and I don't want to teach in a heated studio. That's something that I personally shifted from when I stopped teaching for Baptiste yoga. It wasn't necessarily at that point in time that I didn't really like teaching in the heat anymore, but I can tell you for sure in my teaching going forward, I really stayed away from teaching in places that were heated. Although I did teach in a heated studio, but it wasn't nearly as hot as Baptiste. But those are the kinds of things that on a personal level will either resonate with you or not. And I really feel like when you teach in a way that connects to what you love, it's so much easier to teach. It's so much easier to create your sequences. So your teaching can come from your lived experience, um, what resonates with you, um, what you want to share with people. That is a huge part of it. What you want to share with people when it comes to yoga versus I don't think it should come from what you think you're supposed to do, what you see people doing on social media, like none of that. So when I talk about um, building a sequence, I want to just give you kind of the framework. The first thing I suggest is you decide what's going to be uh, the what's going to be the objective of this sequence. So let's say it's going to be a slow flow, slow intentional flow. And then the next piece would be what are the sections of the sequence that you're going to include? So you might say, I'm going to start out with some seated poses. I'm going to start out, move from seated poses to some easy sun A's and sun B's. And then I'm going to move to a hip opening sequence, section of the sequence, then going to move to some back bends, then some seated restorative poses, and then Shavasana. So now you've chunked out the sequence sections, and then you just go in and you fill in the literal poses that go into each section. So that's really, I have a sequence template that lays this out. So if you, actually, I'll put that in the show notes, but a link to that. But that, I just want you to think high level, is a really easy way to create your sequence. And you're starting from, I mean, in this example, I'm starting from the objective. And then even above that, I want you to think about what we're talking about here, starting from, well, what do I love about teaching? How do I want to show up in my classes? And this helps your sequencing become easier because you're not guessing, you're building from familiarity, you're not building from trying to do what you think is expected of you. Now, I do want to speak to the anatomy piece because, sometimes people will say to me, I really am more of a spiritual person. I don't really want to focus on the anatomy. And I don't want you to think of focusing on anatomy as something that you would do at the exclusion of other things. I actually want you to think, or I want to offer you a reframe here, in that anatomy is part of everything you do. It's part, we're talking yoga teaching, of course. It's part of every class you teach. It's part of every style that's taught. It's the common thread that connects all of us as yoga teachers. We're all teaching movement, and in the context of what we do as yoga teachers, we are movement professionals. We are teaching movement. So whether you are a very spiritual person and that comes through how you teach, whether you like to teach restorative classes or yin classes where maybe the outward focus isn't really on functional movement as much as deep work in the muscles and the tissues, whether you're a trauma-informed yoga teacher who is doing deep work on on a inner level with your students. All of the types of yoga there always have anatomy as the fundamental or one of the fundamental building blocks, foundational blocks for that style of yoga. So, it will give structure, but the structure is based on the type of yoga you're teaching. So certainly for someone like me who teaches a very functional movement-based flow, it's going to be a big part of that. But if I was teaching a restorative class, it might not be so front and center. It might just inform the cues that I use without being so front and center in the cues that I use. Now, sometimes when we get into different styles, teachers are afraid I'm doing it wrong. And I've had plenty of coaching calls where we've done kind of a sequence solution session where a teacher will tell me, okay, here's generally what I'm doing for my sequence. Can you tell me if this is right? And I don't know if it's right. There really is no right. I know you're going to hear that from other people, but I don't really believe there's a right sequence. There's more, what's your logic for the sequence? And part of that is everything we're talking about here. How do you want to show up in your classes? How do you want to help people? What feels easy to you? What feels like it resonates with you? Like that's the style of yoga I want you to teach. And it's not really about what I want, but I would love to see you teach. So the takeaways here for this episode is if you're in teacher training, let's start from the beginning. If you're thinking of taking a teacher training, definitely make a decision that has some sort of connection to how you want to show up as a teacher. That will just make things so much easier for you because you'll be in a training program that has a connection to how you actually want to teach. My best recommendation is almost always to take a training from the studio where you practice. If you can't do that, see if you can find another studio that teaches a similar style or does a training online that's similar in style. If you're in a teacher training program and you're finding out or you're realizing, I don't really think I want to teach the style of yoga that they're teaching within this training, that's okay. Remember, no knowledge is lost. Just continue the training, glean from the training what you can, and know that at the end of that training, you'll have learned some things. And it's also good to learn what you don't want. I mean, that saying contrast provides clarity, which I always attribute to Esther Hicks, but I don't really know who came up with it. Contrast provides clarity. Maybe thank God you took that training and realized that's not a style of yoga you want to teach. That contrast, that feeling of contrast when you are in the training helped you get clearer on what kind of yoga you want to teach. Hence the term, or hence the saying, contrast provides clarity, right? You get how that works. So don't throw in the towel. Don't feel like you wasted your money. Don't feel like you made a quote unquote bad decision. There's really, there's no bad decision here. It's just, again, you're realizing from being in this training, this is not the style of yoga you want to teach. So now you can get clear on what you do want to teach. And then the last thing is, if you're currently teaching, just check in with yourself. Do you feel like where you're teaching and what you're teaching is really how you want to show up for your students? And don't be afraid to pivot. I talked about pivoting at the beginning of this episode, and don't be afraid to do that. Even if it means you're going to quit teaching where you're teaching now, you're going to look for other opportunities to teach different places. Maybe it looks like you start teaching online and experimenting with teaching in a little bit of a different way while you keep the teaching gigs you have now. So there's no right or wrong way, but the worst thing to do is to just tell yourself there's something about you that's making it feel like it's hard, rather than just giving yourself grace and realizing, you know what? I don't think I want to teach like this anymore. And, that's the last thing I'll say here, especially if you've been teaching for some time. You've shifted as a person. It's totally understandable that perhaps the style of yoga you're teaching that worked for you 5 years ago doesn't feel good anymore, doesn't feel like the style of yoga you want to teach anymore. I mean, I can certainly tell you last year when I taught at the local YMCA, which I did for a year, um, there was really no quote unquote style. I mean, they hired me based on my experience. I pretty much had free reign to teach however I wanted. And yoga as a program at the Y was not really their front and center offering. It was all the fitness classes. And when I went into those classes, I had free reign to teach however I wanted. And it was just like a really substantive group. There were anywhere between 15 and 25 people every week. These were people who didn't have yoga high on their list of things they did for exercise, but because it was offered at the YMCA, it was just easy for them to wander in. I had guys, I had weightlifters, I had runners, I had people over 60, I had, people between like, I don't know, early 20s that were really tight and inflexible, by the way. And I just had so much fun just going into this room, no heat. Yes, they had yoga mats, but it wasn't a yoga studio. And just working with what I had in terms of the environment and just really supporting this group of people who was interested in yoga. And, there was no style there. It was really applying anatomy to cues and sequences, helping people move on the mat, helping people make a connection to their body. I don't know what you call that, but to me, at the end of those classes, when they would all be in Shavasana, I would feel like I had done a really good job. I had helped them build connection with their bodies. And so it was less about what style is this and just more about me feeling like I was offering yoga in a way that deeply resonated with me and made me feel like I was really making an impact. And so that's how I would describe what I think yoga teachers are looking for. And I just encourage you to take some time and see what comes up for you when you think about this conversation after we're done. And just listen to that intuitive voice and see maybe there's something different around the corner for you. So, of course, if anything does come up when you think about this episode after you turn it off, I would love to hear what that is. So feel free to drop me a line on Instagram, drop me a DM, and let me know what came up for you as you were listening. And I hope you found this one helpful and thoughtful, and maybe it sparked some thoughts in your mind. Thank you so much for being a listener, and I'll talk to you on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste. Thanks so much for listening. If this episode got you thinking about a current challenge you're having in your classes or gave you ideas that connect to how you'd like to teach, I'd love to hear from you. I know a lot of teachers try to figure things out on their own by reading books, listening to podcast episodes, geez, even mine, or watching videos on social media. And while those things can be helpful, they don't actually solve the problem. What I've seen in my work with teachers is that problem solving and breakthroughs happen when you reach out for help and get one on one support, not in an hours based program, not in a group training, but in a setting where what's going on with you is the focus. If this sounds like the kind of support that would make a difference for you, send me a message on Instagram at Barebones Yoga or email me at karen@barebonesyoga.com. Just include the word podcast and tell me what's on your mind, your biggest challenge right now, or something you want to do next but aren't sure how to get started. I'll reply back with a couple of specific things you can try, and if it makes sense, we can hop on a call as well. You don't have to figure it out on your own.